Drawing this squirrel is easier than you think, and I'm going to show you exactly how you can do it, no matter your skill level. Hello wonderful people, it's Genevieve, and my goal here on this channel is to teach you all about illustration and design. So if you're new, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any of the weekly videos and so that you can join our wonderful creative community. And with that said, grab your drawing tools and let's get started. So as usual, we are going to start by creating a new canvas. For reference, these are the dimension of my canvas. It is literally just the size of the iPad screen, but make sure you find something that works for your own project requirements. If you're not exactly sure what that means, I have a video in which I teach you everything you need to know in order to pick a canvas size. It will be linked in the description below if you want to check it out. That being said, once you have your canvas, we're going to start by sketching everything. And if you're new on the channel, you need to know that here we really go from a rough sketch and then we build the illustration, so we follow the same kind of workflow that an illustrator would follow. So it is step by step. I will teach you everything you need to know in order to achieve the illustration, but you need to trust the process. And that way, it is a really good way of practicing creating your own characters and your own illustrations. So that being said, go ahead and create a new layer for the sketch and make sure to rename it, otherwise it's going to get confusing later. So just rename it to sketch, and then you can pick literally whichever color you want, because we're not going to see this rough sketch in the final result. Here, all we want to do is roughly map out the composition. I personally like to sketch with a very neutral, boring gray. And in terms of brushes, in my tutorials, I always recommend two different ones. So one option is a free brush that comes with Procreate and it's going to allow you to follow along the tutorial just fine. Probably getting, 85 to 90% of the way. And the other brush is going to be a brush from one of my bundles, in this case, the Ultimate Illustration Bundle. And these brushes are going to help you save some time. It's going to make the whole process easier and look probably more professional at the end. But again, they are not essential. I want to make that super clear. You can still follow along with the basic brushes and get good results. So for the sketch, like I was saying for the color, we're not going to see the sketch in the final result, so the brush really doesn't matter. You can either use from the sketching panel the HP pencil, or if you have the Ultimate Illustration Bundle, which by the way will be linked in the description below with a special promo code for the YouTube people, you can pick the sketching brush, of course. So this sketch here is going to be super simple. Don't worry about making it look nice. We just want to make sure that we know where everything is going to be in the illustration. And for that, you might want to separate your character in multiple parts and then kind of connect them together. So starting with super simple shapes. The first thing I'm personally going to draw is the branch so that we know where the character is going to be sitting or standing. So I encourage you to do the same. And again, the branch can be wherever you want it to be. It can have whatever shape you want it to be. Seriously, that's totally up to you. So once you have your branch, we're going to draw simple shapes for the squirrel as well. So in that case, it's going to be a large oval for the body with a slightly smaller, more of a circular shape for the head. So you can see here, I'm being super loose, and I really encourage you to be as well. So once you have your main circles, so for the body and the head, oops, I deleted mine accidentally. There we go, we're back. We can go ahead and start refining where everything is going to be within the character. So for the head, you can simply draw a slightly curved plus sign like this, which is going to help us place the facial features later. Then for the leg, all I personally do is I draw some little ovals like this. For now, that's more than enough, so just like chubby little legs. And same with the arms, I kind of draw just two little ovals, one for the forearm and one from the top of the arm, I guess. I don't know what it's called. You can also draw a rough circle or ellipse if you want your character to be holding something, and then maybe a little circle for the other hand that is kind of reaching around. So that is the beauty of drawing simple shapes. For example, just ovals for the arms. You can easily rotate them around and create different positions for the different limbs. Hopefully that made sense. Once that is done, you can go ahead and sketch the ears. So just thin, pointy little ears that are going to be super cute later. We're going to make them look like they're made of fur, and yeah, super cute. You can also change the shape of the head. I like to have the cheeks being kind of pointy, so you can do that as well, or you can keep it round if you want a rounder character. That is really up to your personal preference. And once you have your basic shapes, you can simply go over and either with a darker color or just pressing harder, you can kind of go ahead and find your line. So from all the little rough sketch lines that you did, all the basic shapes, which line do you actually want to go in for your character, or go with for your character, I should say. So this is really, really fun. You get to experiment and try not to erase at this point, honestly. It's okay if it looks like a mess. We're just sketching, we're just planning. So just press harder on the lines that you know you want to use, and that way you're going to be building your character much more easily than if you were kind of erasing every time you feel like you made a mistake. Sometimes, you know, you need to make those mistakes in order to find something that is going to look good in the end. So that's just my little rant here, I guess. So yeah, just go over your lines, figure out what you want to draw. If you want to draw something in your character's paws, go ahead and draw that. If you want your character to be wearing clothes, go ahead and sketch that as well. But again, don't worry about making it look perfect. That's so not what we want right now. Another thing that is very important not to forget for a little squirrel here is the tail. So you can see I'm going with a fairly thick tail, but there's really no rule of what you can draw in terms of the shape for the tail. As long as it's there and it's big, it's going to look cute in the end, so it's all good. So for the face, you can draw a fairly big nose. It's kind of a rounded triangle, as well as fairly big eyes. One is going to be, you know, very easy to be seen, and the other one is going to be fairly hidden by the side of the head. In terms of the smile, I like to draw just a little curve, so nothing super complicated. But again, here we're just trying to place everything, so don't worry too much about the shape of the eyes themselves and stuff like that. We just want to roughly know where they're going to be. And still here at this stage, all you're doing is refining your sketch to kind of see what you're going to be working with. So take all the time you need here to find your lines, but don't worry about making it look nice or pretty or clean. We just want to have a rough sketch at this point. And a really helpful thing that you can do when you're trying to find your line and figure out your sketch is to actually just go ahead and flip it. So in Procreate, you can just tap on the arrow at the top here and selecting flip horizontal at the bottom. So this is going to allow you to see your sketch with a different eye. So you know when you leave a sketch or a drawing on the table or your desk or whatever for a little bit, a few hours, a few days, when you come back to it, sometimes you're like, ooh, that doesn't look quite as good as I remembered. Well, flipping it has the same effect. It allows you to see what is not, you know, necessarily right. And a quick way of moving stuff around is to use the selection tool, setting it to freehand, making sure that the color fill option is deactivated at the bottom. And then you can kind of draw a selection around whichever part of the body needs to be moved or resized. So for example, here I don't like where the nose is, so I'm just going to draw a selection around the nose. And then with the arrow tool, I can move that around, so place it wherever I want it to be. You can also resize it, so just using the little blue handles on the side. Another thing that you might want to use in order to tweak your sketch and kind of play with the proportions and shape is the liquify tool, which is located in the magic wand menu here at the top, so the adjustment panel, pretty much at the bottom, the second to last. Now, if you set your liquify tool to push, so the first option on the left, and then play with the size, you're going to be able to just move your lines around. So you can see here, you can kind of push stuff around. So using that tool, you can change the shape of your character a little bit and kind of play with everything you've drawn so far so that you like the result a little bit more. So working with both the selection tool to move stuff around and the liquify tool to change the curves and everything is really, really helpful so that you can take your rough sketch to a place that you like a little bit more without having to, again, erase and redraw everything all the time, which is super time consuming and doesn't necessarily give super good results either. So I personally work a lot with the selection tool and the liquify tool when I'm drawing illustrations. Once you're done, don't forget to flip your sketch back, and that way you might also see that you overcorrected some stuff, so you can kind of flip back and forth until you're happy with your illustration. And once you are, we are going to move on to adding the colors. So if you've made it this far in the video, congrats, that was by far the hardest part of this entire tutorial. Now we're just going to block the general shape of the color, so just creating a bunch of silhouettes. At this point, you might want to lower the opacity of your sketch and change the blending mode to multiply. This is going to allow us to have the sketch be less kind of in the way when we're drawing, but also seeing it pretty well on darker colors. Once that is done, you can create a new layer, put it below the sketch, and rename it to Squirrel. So on this layer, I don't know if you can hear it, I'm sorry, my rabbit is just jumping around, it's being really loud. On the squirrel layer, we're going to simply create a silhouette, so a one solid color of the squirrel. I was gonna say rabbit. Oh no. And I created a color palette. As you can see here, it is totally free. If you want to do the exact same thing as I do, you can download it. I will link it in the description below. Otherwise, I really encourage you to pick your own colors. Even just trying to pick colors that are similar to mine, that is a really good practice. So we're going to start for the squirrel with a kind of dark orange reddish color. And in terms of the brushes here, all we want is a brush that is going to allow us to draw the silhouette. So you could use in the airbrushing panel the hard brush, making sure that the opacity is at 100% if you're following my watercolor videos. Otherwise, if you have the illustration bundle, go ahead and pick the, if I can find it, there it is. Okay. Go ahead and pick the base round brush. And again, here all we're doing is we're just mapping out the silhouette of the character. So everything that is squirrel is going to be outlined here. So we're going to have, for example, the legs, the body, and don't worry too much about the shirt. So just kind of that general area. And here, I mean, you want to make sure that you take the time to do the outline properly, because that's going to have a big impact on the final result. But don't agonize over it either, you know, just try to find a happy medium. And there's really no magic to it, just outline everything. And once your outline is fully completed, you're going to fill in the shape. So for that, you need to make sure that there's no holes in the outline. Otherwise, when you try to go ahead and fill in the shape, it's just going to fill in the entire canvas. So make sure that your shapes are fully closed. And to fill in shapes with Procreate, all you have to do is to drag your color onto the shape and it's going to fill it in, just like the paint bucket in Photoshop and in like a lot of other digital art software. So that's, you know, super easy, super quick. So again, you can go ahead and refine your shape as much as you need. I find that often whenever I fill in the silhouette, I kind of get a better feel for the character and I want to change a few curves and a few things. So if you feel the same way, that's totally okay. That's totally normal. That's a good sign actually. So make sure that everything squirrel is outlined and filled in so you have your full-on squirrel silhouette. And then we're going to do the same thing with the other parts of the illustration. So super easy, a little bit time consuming, but really that's going to be the strong base so that you have a really super cool illustration at the end, and so that everything that we do from there is going to be super simple as well. You could go ahead and draw everything on one layer. I encourage you to draw on separate layers so that you can easily change the colors and move stuff around later. So you can go ahead and create a new layer above the squirrel but below the sketch and rename this one to shirt. Now I'm gonna go with this green here for the shirt, so that's what I like. But you can obviously go with any color of your choice. And here we're doing the exact same thing. So we're just outlining the shirt so that we can then fill it in and have a shirt silhouette. Great, and once you have your silhouette for the shirt, you guessed it, we're gonna create a new layer, and this time we're gonna draw the acorn. I'm not exactly sure what I was thinking when I was filming, but I named this layer nut, which is not right, but anyway. And here we're gonna go with this golden color here, and we're simply going to, you guessed it as well, just sketch out the, well, not sketch out, but we're going to outline and then fill in the acorn so that we can have the nice little acorn silhouette. So you know the drill by now, nothing complicated here, just a little bit more time consuming, but then everything from now on is going to be super easy because we're just going to be working from these silhouettes and adding more details to them. We're also going to be drawing the top part of the acorn with a darker brown, but we can draw it on the same layer because it's the same element. I personally don't bother creating a separate layer, so same thing again, just creating a nice clean outline and then fill it in so that we have the full silhouette for the acorn. Great, so at this point we can go ahead and change the background color, so just clicking on the automatically created background layer and then picking whichever color you want. I'm gonna go with this super vibrant apple green, green apple green, whatever. Then once that is done, we're going to refine the background a little bit by adding the tree. I mean, refine the background. We're going to add the tree. So create a new layer, put it below the squirrel, rename it to tree, and then you're going to pick any kind of brown that you want. I'm going to go with the last brown in the color palette, so a dark chocolatey brown. And you probably guessed it, all you have to do here is outline your tree, your branches, and then fill it in so you have your tree silhouette. And while you're working on that, let's talk a little bit about the giveaway. So the prize for this video is going to be the Ultimate Illustration Bundle. So I'm going to pick one winner. I'm going to announce it on my Instagram story on the date that I'm going to write on the screen right here. And the way to enter is really easy. If you've watched my videos before, you know that at one point in the video, there's going to be a secret password. And if you're new on the channel, don't worry, it's just at one point in the video on the screen, and I'm gonna say it as well, there's going to be a secret word that you're gonna have to write in the comments. This is the way to enter. But be careful though, in order to enter the giveaway, you need to write the secret password both on YouTube, so in the comments on this video, as well as on Instagram, on the post that is going to look a little bit like this. So keep an eye out for the secret password, and for now we're going to keep going. We're going to add a little bit more color variation and texture on our squirrel. So if you've made it this far in the video, congrats, that was by far the hardest part of this entire tutorial. Now we're just going to block the general shape of the color, so just creating a bunch of silhouettes. So we're going to start with this cream color on the face and on the belly of the squirrel. So for that, go ahead and create a new layer above the squirrel layer. And this one you're going to apply it as a clipping mask. So just tapping on a layer and then clicking clipping mask in the menu. We don't need to rename it because later we're going to merge it and then the name would get lost anyway. So don't waste any time on that. So for the cream color, you can go back and pick, well, the cream in the color palette. Otherwise, pick the same color you use for your squirrel and just make it way lighter, but you don't want a pure white, otherwise we won't be able to add lights later. So for the brush, you can use either the 6B pencil and the sketching panel or the basic texture brush if you have the illustration bundle. And here you're going to simply gently brush over your character where you want the cream accent to be. And here, notice that I'm not holding my pencil straight, like with a 90-degree angle from the screen. I'm really holding it with an angle that is super close to the screen. And that way, at least if you have an Apple pencil or another pencil that have tilt sensitivity, you're gonna get strokes that are really smooth and kind of blend with the rest of your artwork as opposed to being super sharp and precise. So that kind of mimics what a real pencil would do on real paper. And that way you're gonna be able to get better gradients. But if you don't have that, that's totally okay, don't worry about it. We can blend later to make it look more smooth. And since we're drawing on a separate layer, you can always go with the eraser to erase anything that should not be, cream. So that's super helpful, and that's one of the reasons we draw on a separate layers. That being said, when you're done, feel free to merge the layers by squishing them with 2 fingers. Then we're going to add some patterns on the shirt as well. So creating a new layer, clipping mask as well. And basically what a clipping mask does, I forgot to say it, but it allows you to draw on this new layer that you just created, and everything you draw is going to stay within the shape of the layer below. So in our case, the shirt silhouette. So go ahead and pick a lighter color or any color you want to use for the patterns on the shirt. And in terms of brushes, you can stick with the 6B pencil from the sketching panel, or if you have the illustration bundle, go ahead and pick the outline brush. And here you can really draw any pattern of your choice. You can follow exactly what I am doing, or I also have a few Christmas video in which I teach you how to draw a few kind of Christmassy patterns. I will link these video in the description below if you want to check it out, but seriously, here you can draw really anything you want on the shirt, or you could leave it plain if you want. So here, feel free to pause the video. I'm going to speed up so you can still have an example of what I am doing. Speed up the video, I mean. But yeah, there's no rule here. You just want to draw cool patterns on the shirt to make your character feel a little bit more detailed and more interesting. Awesome, so once you're happy with the patterns on the shirt, you can go ahead and merge everything. So just simple squishing with 2 fingers, just like we did for the squirrel. And with that, we're going to go back and add some more details on the squirrel. Well, details. We're going to start drawing the eyes. So create a new layer above the squirrel, below the shirt, and rename it to eyes. Now the eyes here, well, I like to create them on the separate layers so that we can either resize them or move them around really easily. You could draw them on the same layer as the squirrel if you wanted to. And you're going to pick a super light gray color, almost white, but not quite, so that we can add a little bit more highlights later. And you're going to stick with the same brush, so either the 6B pencil or the outline that we used for the shirt. And here you're just going to draw the basic shape of the eyes and then fill them in. Since we're using a brush that has some texture to it, make extra sure that there's no gap in the outlines. Otherwise, if you try to fill them automatically, it is just going to fill in the entire canvas. I personally like sometimes for a smaller shape like this to just go in and fill them in manually. It takes 2 seconds, and that way you have a little bit more texture as well. So once you have your basic eye shape, go ahead and create a new layer above the eyes, apply as a clipping mask too. And this one you're going to rename it to pupil or iris, whatever you want. And here you can really draw any color eyes you want. I'm going to go with just super dark brown. Again, I don't want it to be perfectly black because I want to be able to add some shadows later. So I'm going to go with something a little bit like this. And for the eyes, well, the pupil, simply draw the pupil. I mean, again, nothing crazy complicated here, but take the time to do it so that you like the direction of where your character is looking at, basically, but don't agonize over it, because since we're drawing on a separate layer with a clipping mask, later we're going to be able to just move the eyes around. I'll show you in just a few seconds, but for now, go ahead and draw the pupil really quickly. So once you have them, what I was saying is if you have your pupil layer selected, if you use the arrow tool, you can easily just kind of move them around to kind of change the direction of where your character is looking. Since we have a clipping mask, it is always going to stay within the base shape of the eye. So I really like this trick. That way, if you kind of decide to change something later in the illustration, you don't have to redraw the eyes, you can quickly change them. You're also going to create a new layer above the pupil. It is also going to be a clipping mask, and this one you're going to rename it to shadow. You're going to set the blending mode to linear burn, and you are going to lower the opacity around, I guess, 30%, but we can always tweak that later. And for the shadows in general, we want to avoid having just a pure gray because that creates really muddy shadows. It's not interesting. I personally like to go with shadows that are gray with a little bit of color, usually gray with a little bit of purple or blue. In this case, since the background is already, green, I'm gonna go with a more like almost pink kind of purple. And here all you have to do is draw some sort of a crescent moon shape on the top of the eye to add a little bit of a shadow there. And this is not super realistic. Obviously, we don't have like crazy sharp shadows like this on the eyes, most of the time at least. But in the context of illustration, it is a really easy way to show that the eyes are not flat, they are more of a spherical form. I also like adding some lights, so creating a new layer above the shadows, it is also going to be a clipping mask, and this one you're going to rename it to lights, or light. For the blending mode here, we're going to use add. Add is really powerful though, so you might want to lower the opacity quite a lot. Here I lowered it too much, we're going to see later, I'm going to bring it quite a lot up, and we're going to use pure white. So for now, honestly, the opacity, you can put it at probably 80 or something like that. And all you're doing with the same brush, super simple, you're just adding a little bit of a highlight, so just little dots on the eyes. And here you can see I'm going to up the opacity, like I just told you, around 90. Actually, that's a lot. 85. And to double check that everything is really good with your lights and shadow, you might want to temporarily hide the sketch to see what it looks like without, those crazy lines that are not going to be there at the end anyway. We're also going to draw the outline for the eyes on a separate layer than the rest of the outline so that we can move the eyes super easily. So go ahead and create a new layer, rename it to outline. This one is not a clipping mask, and it's going to be above the light. You're going to keep the opacity and the blending modes at just normal and 100%. So for the outlines, you're going to go with a darker version of your main squirrel color. So in my case, this is going to be kind of a super intense reddish brown. And with the same brush again, so the 6B pencil or the outline brush, you're just going to, outline the eyes. And you can see here, I don't outline the entire eye, I just outline kind of the top and side parts of the eyes, leaving it open at the bottom. I just like the way it looks, but yeah, personal preference. So at this point, we can go ahead and group all of these eye layers so that we can easily move them. And to group in Procreate, all you have to do is swipe your layers towards the right and then click on the group option here at the top. And then you can collapse your group by clicking on the little arrow here. So that is a really nice way of keeping your file organized. And again, it's going to make moving the eyes super easy. We're also going to draw the rest of the facial features on a separate layer so that we can move them around super easily. So for that, go ahead and create a new layer above the eyes layer and rename it to nose or face or something, something you'll remember. You're going to color pick the color you use for the eyes if it's a dark brown, otherwise go ahead and pick a dark brown and go ahead and draw your nose. So nothing complicated here, you just go over your sketch. You can, if you decide that you want a different kind of shape, you can definitely, draw it differently than you did on your sketch. But yeah, you just want to draw the nose, super simple. You can also draw the mouth with the same color. So yeah, super uncomplicated at this stage. We're just kind of bringing our squirrel to life by giving it a face. So once you have the face, you might want to add a little bit more highlight on the nose because right now it kind of looks like a hole and we don't want a hole in the nose, we want a nose. So pick pure white and just draw some little highlights, kind of like this. I like to draw 2 little ovals on the top, and that way it doesn't look like a hole anymore, it looks like a nose, which is exactly what we want. You can also keep your white and stay on this layer to draw some little whiskers on your face. And here, drawing whiskers is actually more difficult than it looks. Usually one side is kind of crooked and the other one is fine, so don't agonize too much, draw both sides, and once you have both sides, if there's one that you don't like, feel free to use the selection tool at the top and resize them. So I'm going to do that, but before I'm going to resize the nose as well, so just selecting the nose, super simple. Might be helpful to hide your sketch as well, just to see what you're working with. And then with the arrow tool, I can change the content of my selection, resize it, position it somewhere else. So this is what I'm doing with the nose. And again, this is the beauty of drawing on separate layers, the elements that are super important, like the facial features. You can move them around to make sure that they look exactly how you want them to be. Once that is done, go ahead and create a group with everything that is squirrel, so from the squirrel to the acorn or knot layer, and then you can rename this group to squirrel. I know it's a bit confusing because we have a layer named squirrel and then group named squirrel, but we'll figure it out. And then once you have everything grouped like this, you can go ahead and use the liquify tool again to change your shape. So going back in the adjustment panel, selecting liquify at the bottom, setting your brush to push and then the size to whatever you want. You can go ahead and experiment and tweak any kind of shape that is not exactly how you want. Just be careful though, now that we're working with the real color for the illustration, you don't want to change the shape too much, otherwise it's going to stretch the pixels and the quality is going to start looking a little bit weird. So you can lose liquify really easily when you are at the sketching phase because we don't see the sketch, but for the color you want to make sure that you don't overdo it, like we couldn't change this squirrel and turn it into a giraffe or something. So take all the time you need here until you're really happy with your basic squirrel shape, and then we're going to start working on the background. So the background should be fairly easy to do, and I even made a free brush that I'm going to tell you about a little bit later just to kind of help us with that. But we're going to start by creating a new layer below the tree layer, and this one we're going to rename to light. We're going to change the blending mode to add and lower the opacity because this layer is basically, we're imagining that the light is filtering through the trees, the branches and the leaves. So this is kind of this random glow that we have in the background. And for the color, you're going to pick a super light green, so a super light version of your green that you have in the background. And in terms of brushes here, it really depends. You could use the basic texture if you want texture in your lights and make it super big. I personally want a really soft light, so you can all go and pick the soft brush in the airbrushing panel. So that's just a free brush that comes with Procreate. And you can, again, personal preference, you can up the opacity to 100% or you can lower it. I personally start with 100%, but I recommend that you maybe start lowering it around 80 and kind of build your lights, since add is such a strong blending mode. It's really helpful sometimes to start with a lower opacity so that you can have a little bit more control over what you're doing. And I say control, but here all we're doing basically is just adding some random blobs. So we don't want to have a light that is super precise. We want to have something that is a really organic shape because, again, we're just imagining that this is the light that is filtering through the leaves and the trees, so it would be quite random. And you can lower the opacity, play with the opacity of this layer until you get something that you like. You want to make sure that it looks super bright, so we want to have a lot of contrast because this is what is going to make our character pop from the background. So we want to have something that is really bright. And if at any point you feel like you've overdrawn your light and there's just too much of it, feel free to use the eraser, set the eraser to the soft brush as well. And then you can just go in and tweak the shape to make it a little bit more precise and less of a big, massive, uniform blob. So experiment with that here. Again, there's really no right or wrong way of doing it. It's a personal preference. You just want to build a little bit of light in the background. And once you have your basic lights, we're going to go ahead and add some oak leaf shadows really super simply. I made a free brush like I was telling you, so you can download it in the description below. And with the brush, there are the instructions on how to install it, so super simple. Once you have it, go ahead and create a new layer above your light layer and rename it to background leaves. And you're going to pick a darker version of your green background. So go ahead and pick the oak leaf brush as well. And for the size, you're going to have to experiment here. So start with a fairly big size, and then you can just go over and run your brush across the entire canvas, and it's just going to stamp a bunch of leaves. So super easy. Once you're happy with how many leaves you have, you can go over and lower the opacity of this layer. For now, I'm going to put it around 30%, while we're going to tweak it later. We're going to create a new layer with smaller leaves this time, so just a new layer below the background leaves but above the light, and this one we're going to rename it to small background leaves, I guess. It doesn't really matter. And yeah, we're going to make the brush a little bit smaller, nothing too crazy, but we just want to have a little bit variety, and we want to make it look like the leaves are a bit further in distance, so they should be smaller that way. So super simple. Again, you just run the brush across the canvas and it's going to stamp some leaves. I like to keep the smaller ones towards the edges of the canvas, just a personal preference. And these are going to make them lighter than the big leaves because they're further away, so we should see them a little bit less. And feel free to tweak the opacity of both of these layers until you get something that you like for both of them. Here it's a personal preference, but yeah, that was all that we had to do to add a little bit more details and interest to the background. You might also want to add some leaves on the foreground to add even more dimension and depth to the piece. So for that, you would create a new layer either above the tree or above the squirrel layer. It doesn't really matter at this point. I'm going to do it above the tree, and we're going to rename this one to front leaves or something like that. And from these front leaves, I personally am going to hand draw them so they have a little bit more of a randomness to the shape and they don't look all the same. But if you want, if you're in a pinch for time, I know this tutorial is long enough, you can just use the oak tree or oak leaf brush and just kind of stamp them automatically as well. If you want to hand draw them, I personally like to just start by drawing kind of the middle line so that I have an idea of the angle where the leaves are going to be. And then you can draw this kind of this wiggle shape around to mimic the oak shape of the leaves. I don't know what I'm saying anymore. But yeah, simple technique that we've been doing since the start. We just draw the outline and then we fill in the shape. So we're going to create a bunch of leaves, but for now we're just going to focus on the silhouette. But these leaves are really going to help frame the character. So as opposed to having something super open like we have right now, adding some leaves in the foreground is going to, again, just bring everything towards the center and bring the focus and the eye towards the character as opposed to having it kind of go outside of the piece. And with that, it is time for the secret password. So if you've watched this funny video, please go ahead and comment autumn. If you're new on the channel, you might be like, what's the deal with the secret password? Well, we've been doing this for months now and people really enjoy it. It's just a fun thing. I mean, it's really great for two reasons. The first one is it gives me a lot of insight into how to edit and pace my videos better, which helps me create better tutorials for you guys, so that's great. But the other thing that is really great is it allows us to see who's part of the creative community here that we are building on the channel. Especially for me, because you guys know me, you hear me throughout the video when I give you the explanations, you see my face in the intro. So, you know me a little bit at least, but I have no idea who you guys are. And whenever you leave a comment, I get to see sometimes your name, sometimes even your face. And yeah, it's just so cool to see who's part of our community here. So yeah, just leave a comment with the word autumn. And if you want to enter the giveaway, make sure that you leave it both on YouTube and on Instagram. And then we're going to keep going. We're going to add some details and shading to the piece to make it come together. So this next part of the tutorial in which we add the details is really super relaxing. I'm not going to do a lot of talking. I'm going to give you some pointers and then let you do it on your own while still having the video rolling if you need some visual clues. But yeah, super simple, super relaxing. I recommend you maybe grab a cup of tea or something and just kind of do it really super simply. So anyway, with that said, go ahead and create a new layer on top of your squirrel group, but in the group. And at this point, you might also want to put the eye group and the nose group at the very, very top of your squirrel group. So above the new layer that you just created. I don't know what I'm doing here. Oh yeah, I had a little mistake. I just erased that. Sorry. So yeah, on this new layer that you created, it's going to be the details layer. You're going to draw, well, the details. And for the details, you can stick with the same brush we've been using, so the 6B pencil or the outline brush, and you can go back to the same color that you used for the outline on the eyes. And here, well, you probably guessed it. All you have to do is draw the outlines on your character. Here, I personally like to do kind of like sketching kind of outlines, so as opposed to having one thick, super clean line like for comic books or something like that. I like to bring texture and movement that way. So yeah, just kind of super soft, super organic and natural little strokes. So don't worry about making your outline look super perfect. I know that line art is how can I say that nicely? It's a bit annoying. But here, this is not what we're doing. You know, we don't worry about it. We just kind of draw some lines to bring a little bit more sharpness to the piece, a little bit more details to the piece. So you go around your entire character. You can add any kind of details you want. For example, you can see I added some little details on the ears, and later I'm gonna go in and add some details on the like add some little fur, like little lines for the hair, I mean, basically over the character. And you're going to draw these details around everything that is within this squirrel group. So don't worry about changing the color for now. We're going to change that later, but you're going to draw the outlines for the sweater, the squirrel, the acorn, anything that is on your squirrel character or around, like in that group, you draw the outlines here with the same color, same brush, all on one layer. And later we're going to I'm going to give you a quick tip on changing the color so that it doesn't look as crazy as it does right now, because it really looks strange having dark red outlines on the sweater. But anyway, I'm going to stop talking. I'm going to speed up the video a little bit. Feel free to either pause it or keep it going, whatever you feel the most comfortable with. And we're going to meet up in the next step where we're going to add outlines to the other pieces of this illustration. Awesome, so once you have your outlines for the squirrel, like I was saying, we're going to do the same thing but on the other parts of the illustration. So we're going to start with the leaves and then we're going to do it on the tree. So you can collapse your squirrel group now and just create a new layer above the front leaf layer. We're not going to add outlines on the background leaves because we want to have them kind of blend with the background, but we definitely want to sharpen these front leaves a little bit. So just a new layer, nothing crazy here. And I'm gonna pick a darker version of your green, so either picking it in the palette or color picking it on the leaf and then manually making it darker. Whatever you want, whatever you use, this is totally not that big of a deal. So here again, all you have to do is draw the outline for the leaves and maybe kind of some veins in the middle. Nothing complicated. Once more, I'm going to stop talking, let you focus on it, and then we're going to meet in the next step in which we're going to add the outlines and the details, which are going to be the texture for the tree. Oh, and just one last little thing. I'm personally going to make my green a little bit darker for the outlines. If you want to do the same, you can just color drop your color on the other outlines that you already drawn. Super easy, super simple, and just keep going with the other leaves. Great, so you know what we're doing now. Once you're done with the details for the leaves, go ahead and create a new layer above the tree and rename it to details. Now the reason I draw the details on separate layers as the rest, like the silhouette, is so that we can easily erase them if we make a mistake or want to change something, as opposed to having to erase the leaf itself and then redrawing it. It's just easier, but at any point feel totally comfortable to just merge the layers if you know you're happy with what you're working with. So here for the tree, I personally like to start just outlining the tree like super simply, and then going in and drawing some spirals and just like nice little waves to show that there's movement happening in the bark. Well, movement happening in the bark. Well, that there's bark. It's not just, you know, a like plastic super uniform tree. That is kind of creepy actually, thinking about that. So yeah, just drawing some super simple spirals and waves, just something like this, you know, it doesn't have to be complicated, but it does add a lot of texture to the tree and make it look more like a tree and not just like a weird brown thing. And don't worry about overlapping the leaves. Since we're drawing everything on separate layers, we can just go in later and erase any kind of lines that shouldn't be there, which is exactly what I'm about to do. So just picking the eraser and quickly going over, super simple. Take 2 seconds, and that's the magic on drawing on separate layers. You can kind of go ahead and fix anything, tweak anything super easily. That being said, once more, if you want to merge your layers, for example, if your Procreate doesn't allow you to have like a ton of layers, feel free to merge them at any point. We won't need them anymore. I personally like to keep them separate. I'm a bit, I guess, paranoid from working with clients. Having separate layers allow you to, for example, change the color of the shirt very easily if the client doesn't like it. So that's why I usually keep a lot of layers. Now, going back in your Squirrel group, we're going to activate Alpha Lock on that detail layer by either swiping it with 2 fingers towards the right or tapping in on the layer itself. You can activate Alpha Lock from the menu. And what Alpha Lock does is now everything we draw on this detail layer that has Alpha Lock is going to stay within the lines that were already there. So that way we can quickly just brush over the lines to recolor them. So I'm going to start, for example, you can see here with the sweatshirt, I'm just color picking the green base that we had there, making it darker and just going over and brushing over the lines to turn them green instead of this weird dark red that doesn't look super good for the sweater. So this is a really helpful tip, and it saves a lot of time. At least I think personally it saves a lot of time in the whole process, as opposed to, you know, when you're kind of drawing your outlines, having to change the color all the time. When you're drawing it, you can just focus on trying to draw nice outlines from the start and then later worry about the color. I personally think it's a workflow that saves me a lot of time and just makes everything feel a bit more natural and organic. So you're just going to do that for the acorn, the sweatshirt, and any other shape that you might need to recolor on your squirrel. So super simple. And once that is done, we're ready to move on to the last part of the video, which is going to be adding the shadows and the light, and that's going to bring the whole piece together. It's going to make it look so good. So don't give up if you've made it this far. This is the last little stretch, but it is what is going to make the biggest difference in the look of your whole illustration. So let's keep going. So for the shadows here, since we have a lot of things in this piece, instead of drawing the shadows on all the individual elements, we're going to draw the shadows and treat this thing as a painting. So we're going to create a new layer above everything. We're going to rename it to shadows, and we're going to change the blending mode of this layer to linear burn for now, lowering opacity around, I don't know, 30%. This is kind of my go-to, but we can change it later. And in terms of the color, you want to pick something that is similar to the color you use for the shadows in the eyes, but honestly don't iconize. It doesn't matter if it's not exactly the same. So in terms of brushes, you can stick with the 6B pencil from the sketching panel, or if you have the illustration brushes, going ahead and pick the basic texture. You could also pick the shader. That's really a personal preference. I'm going to go with the basic texture because I think it's a bit more precise. And again, since we have a lot of precise elements in here, I want to make sure I have a lot of control. Now here, there's not a clear direction for the light because the light is filtering through the leaves, so it's not super harsh. It is going to be mostly kind of everywhere, coming from behind the character. So in that case, we want the shadows to not be crazy harsh either. We want the shadows to be mostly there to show the volume of the character. So it's going to be a little bit more like sculpting as opposed to really shading. So draw a little bit of shadows, and if you notice that your opacity is too low, go ahead and up it up. So I'm already putting it at 40%. But yeah, like I was saying, it's much more like sculpting here at this point and showing the volume. So for example, we know that the arm is in front of the sweater, that's the word. So we're going to shade the sweater so that the arm kind of pops. We also know that the head is on top of the acorn, such as the hands are on top of the acorn or above or holding the acorn. I don't know. I can't speak English anymore. So we're going to shade around there as well. So once more, there's no wrong or right way of doing this. You would just want to experiment and add a little bit more volume. It doesn't need to be perfect in terms of like physics. That's not what we're into. But it needs to be fairly believable. And believable, I mean, as long as it is consistent in the sense that it's not crazy harsh or crazy soft, it should be okay. And here, for example, for the face, I don't want to have a crazy harsh shadow, but we know that the light is coming from the back. So you can just gently brush a shadow towards the bottom and the middle of the face. So nothing super crazy, but you can see if I hide the layer, it does add a little bit more dimension. And again, it helps sculpting the creature. Wow. Sorry guys, my English is really out of the... I don't even know what I'm trying to say here. I can't speak anymore. It's been way too long doing this voiceover. I'm really sorry. I'm gonna try my best to keep going though. But yeah, so here, experiment, draw super soft shadows, and if you don't have a lot of pressure sensitivity or tilt sensitivity, whether because of the brush you're using or the actual tool you're using to draw, don't worry about it too much. We can always use the smudge tool to blend them. I'm gonna show you an example on the acorn in just a few seconds. But before that, we want to keep placing the shadows throughout the entire piece. Sorry, there's my head now in the frame. This is getting chaotic. This is what happens with longer tutorial. I kind of start losing my mind, and you see my head in the frame. I don't know what I'm saying anymore, but you know what? At the end, we're together through this. I want you to know that drawing illustrations is a process for me as well. It's not just for you. You know, it takes time for everyone. That is totally normal. And if you need a break at any point when you're drawing illustration, just take a break. It's supposed to be fun. So anyway, once you're done kind of shading the main shadows on the squirrel and on the tree, you can go and use the smudge tool. I personally like to use in the painting panel the stucco brush. I think it keeps the texture fairly nice as opposed to making the shadows or the smudging super soft, which kind of doesn't really work with the other brushes that we've been using. But if you are more into soft blending, you can use the soft brush from the airbrushing panel. And since the light is coming from behind the character, we're going to draw this super bright outline on the character as well. And for that, we're actually going to create a separate layer for each element. So in the squirrel, we're going to go above, well, in the squirrel group, we're going to create a new layer above the nut, but below the details, well, above the, I was going to say eggplant. Acorn? Gosh, I'm so sorry, guys. Please don't be mad at me. But yeah, a new layer, we're going to rename it to lights, and we're going to set the blending mode to add, lower the opacity around, 25-30% for now. We can always tweak it later. You know the drill by now, you're an expert. And we're going to pick the lightest green that we have in the background for the light for that color, and we're going to either stick with the 6B pencil from the sketching panel, or if you have the illustration bundle, I recommend you use the outline brush because it is really, really precise, and we want to have kind of precise lights here. And seriously, all you have to do is super fun. It makes a really, really big difference, and you can see I'm already changing the opacity to around 50%. So at any point, feel free to play with the opacity. It is not a set number for everyone. It depends on the effect you want. It depends on the color you are using. So tweak it and find a number that you like. Don't necessarily just copy what I am doing. Experiment and see what you like. But yeah, all we're doing here is super simple, but it makes a big difference. We're just going to go around and outline the outlines. So we're kind of adding a little bit of light wherever there's a sharp cut or sharp break. So when the body ends, basically on the edges of the face, on the edges of the ears, on the edges of the shirt, on the edges of the acorn, whenever there's like the element ending and connecting or touching the background, we add an highlight there. And that's going to do two things. Again, it's going to show that the light is coming from behind the character, so it's kind of coming on the edges only, but it's also going to really help the character pop from the background and make it feel like this is the star of the illustration. This is where your eye needs to look, this is what is lit, this is what is being framed really nicely. So yeah, and you can also add a little bit of a highlight on the acorn itself, because it's, you know, it's not as it's more glossy, I guess, than the squirrel itself or the sweater. So that's a nice way of kind of showing that it's a different not texture, a different material finish. You get the point. So as usual, take all the time you need in order to do this until you're really happy with the result. And once you're done, we're going to, well, we're going to do the same thing on the tree and on the leaves. Not as strongly, but we still want to have a little bit more texture and light on the other elements as well. Not the background, but the foreground. So we're going to create a new layer above the tree layer, so we can collapse the squirrel group again. So creating, a new layer above the tree layer, or above the front leaves layer actually. Let's do that. Let's create a new layer above the front leaves layer, rename it to light. It's also going to be a blending mode of add, and we're going to once more lower the opacity around what it was for the squirrel, maybe a little bit lower than that, so that we have less intense lights, so that we don't steal, you know, the spotlight literally from the squirrel. And here, since we have a layer for the lights above the leaves and the branch, you can draw the highlights for both the leaves and the branch or the tree on this one layer. So here I'm already going and playing with the opacity. That's a nice trick, you know, whenever you start setting your opacity, or you start a new layer that has opacity changes or blending mode, just draw a little bit and then going and kind of tweak your opacity or blending mode based on what you have. That way you're gonna get a better feel for what to do for the rest of the piece, as opposed to if you're kind of trying to wait until the end to change the opacity. Of course, if you want to change it at the end, of course, that is, you know, totally fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But I personally always draw just a little, like a sample, I guess, and then go in and kind of play with the opacity a little bit more. So here, nothing crazy. You're just going to go over and draw some highlights again on the edges of both the tree as well as the leaves. And for the tree, you can draw the highlights around the texture on the tree as well, to make it look like the bark is kind of raised in some areas. Now these highlights are a pretty good start, but we're going to really amp it up by creating a new layer for extra lights. It's going to be kind of a halo effect. It's going to be really cool. So this new layer is going to be above everything, above the shadows, well, below the sketch, doesn't really matter. And we're going to rename it to extra lights. And you guessed it, we're going to use the blending mode add, and we're going to lower the opacity around 25% for now, but we are going to change it later. You know that already. We're going to stick with the same color, the same brush, maybe making the brush a little bit bigger so that it's not quite as precise. And here, what we're going to do, it kind of seemed a little bit strange, but the thing with light, when the light is coming from behind something, it tends to shine really intensely in the corners. So what we're going to do here is, whenever there's a corner or a little tiny area, we're going to roughly draw like a blob of light there. The shape doesn't matter, we're going to blur it later. But yeah, so you're going to have these lights kind of in the corner where the head meets the body, the tail where it meets the body, small little holes around the legs, smaller ones around the ears, on the corner of the face where it meets the acorn, kind of every little corner, every little angle. That's where you're going to draw these extra lights. And once you're done, all you have to do is go in the adjustment panel here at the top, selecting Gaussian blur for the entire layer. And then you can change the intensity of the blur by just swiping your finger or your pencil from the right to left until you get something that you like. So you want it to be fairly blurred, but as you can see here, if you hide the layer, although you don't necessarily notice that it's there, when you hide it, you see that it makes a big difference. It kind of brings the character within the piece while also making it just more interesting overall. We're also going to add some little floating lights as a final touch. It makes everything super cute. So just a new layer above everything, renaming it floating lights, using the blending mode add, you know it by now, setting the opacity around 30% for now, and with the same brush, same color, maybe making your brush a little bit smaller this time, just drawing some little dots all over your piece. I like to draw the dots in groups of 2 or 3 and trying to keep the shape or the shape. Trying to make sure that there's not like a clear pattern that looks too structured. We want to just have them kind of float around. You can imagine that it's, for example, little dust pieces or particle that are floating around, and then the sun is hitting on them and it makes it look like they're glowing. I think it just brings the whole piece together and adds a little bit more interest to it. It takes 2 seconds, and you can also use Gaussian blur on them to make them blend a little bit better with the whole piece. You don't want to be too blurred though, otherwise it's going to look a little bit weird. So you can see it took me, what, 30 seconds to do it, and you can, as usual, play with the opacity. But one thing that I like to do is have the whole opacity fairly high for this layer, and then go with the eraser and very lightly erase some of them. That way you get some variation and variety in the opacity of the little dots, which is going to make it look like they're not all on the same like frame, same plane. Some are further, some are closer. So yeah, it's just the little details like this that are gonna make your piece feel a little bit more professional. Another thing that you might want to do is have some different hues for your leaves in the front here. And a way that I really like to do that is going back and selecting my front leaf layer and using the selection tool, setting it to freehand and just drawing over some of the leaves. So selecting some of the leaves, not all of them. I'm gonna go with this bottom one and this top one and maybe this one right here. So something like this. And then you can go in the adjustment panel, picking hue, saturation, brightness for the entire layer. And you can play with the hue a little bit. So that way you can see it's super quick. It takes like a few seconds, but you're gonna get more variety in the leaf, which looks much more natural and much more interesting. There's no way that all the leaves in the tree are gonna be the exact same green. That's not a thing. So you can use this technique as many times as you want to add as much color variation as you want within the different leaves. And it's gonna make a big difference in the final piece. I think it's a very important detail to do at the end. And you can also do that, for example, here I have kind of a branch at the top of the tree that is a little bit like more in the background. So in theory, it should be lighter because everything, well, all the elements that are further away, or the furthest away an element is in the illustration, the lighter it should be. In theory, I mean, that's kind of a rule of thumb, I guess. So you can go ahead, and if you have an extra branch like this that is further away in your illustration, you can just select it and then use the hue, saturation, brightness tool to make it lighter. Now obviously by changing the color of the leaves, you might want to go ahead and use the alpha lock on both details layers, so the tree and the leaf layer, and then just color picking your new color, making it darker and just brushing over your outlines so that they blend in a little bit better with the new leaf. I'm getting kind of a lot in the details right now. Honestly, you wouldn't have to do that. No one would care, but I care. So yeah, seriously. And here you can have as much fun as you want, kind of changing colors and experimenting with different colors with the hue, saturation, brightness tool. Takes a few seconds, but that way you might discover some color palettes that you had not thought of and that you would honestly prefer to the one that you've been using. So that's always a fun tool to use. It might be a little bit late to change the entire thing in your illustration, but you know what? Better late than never. And if you enjoyed this video and want to learn how to draw even more cute animals, I highly recommend you check out this playlist in which I'm going to teach you exactly that, how to draw cute animals. But before you leave, make sure you give this video a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of the weekly videos. Then click on the link right here and I'll meet you there.